6-year-old Tommy Blake sat cross-legged on a worn camping blanket, his small hands carefully holding a marshmallow over the crackling fire. The sweet smell of toasting sugar filled the cool Oregon night air. His father, Robert, laughed as Tommy's marshmallow caught fire for the third time that evening. His mother, Laura, wrapped a blanket around Tommy's shoulders and kissed the top of his messy brown hair. The forest around them was alive with the usual sounds of nighttime. Crickets chirped their endless songs. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted softly. Tommy loved these camping trips. No television, no homework, just his parents and the wild beauty of the woods. He was telling his dad about a frog he'd found by the creek when something changed. The crickets stopped. The owl went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Tommy's father stood up slowly, his face confused and alert. Then the sky tore open. A beam of light, brighter than anything Tommy had ever seen, erupted from above the trees. It was white and pure and terrifying. Tommy tried to scream but no sound came out. His parents reached for him, their faces twisted in fear, but the light was faster. Tommy felt his body lift off the ground. His mother's desperate hands grabbed at his jacket but couldn't hold on. The last thing he saw was his parents' horrified faces growing smaller and smaller as he shot upward into the impossible light. Then darkness swallowed everything. When Tommy's eyes opened again, everything was wrong. The ground beneath him wasn't ground at all. It was smooth and cold and seemed to glow with a faint blue light. He was inside some kind of box made of crystal or glass, but not like any glass he'd ever seen. It was perfectly clear yet somehow created walls he couldn't pass through. His head hurt. His whole body felt strange, like he'd been asleep for days. Beyond his crystal prison, Tommy saw things that made his 6-year-old brain struggle to understand what his eyes were showing him. The room was massive and filled with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. But this wasn't a movie. Creatures moved around the space and they definitely weren't human. They were gray with skin that looked wet and rubbery. Their heads were too large for their thin bodies, and they had way too many fingers on their long hands. 4, maybe 5, maybe more. Tommy couldn't count them properly because the creatures kept moving. They made sounds that hurt his ears, high-pitched clicking and chittering that felt like needles in his brain. One of them approached his cage and pointed a device at him. A red light scanned across Tommy's body, and he pressed himself against the far wall, tears streaming down his face. These were the collectors, though Tommy didn't know that yet. They were merchants who traveled the galaxy buying and selling rare creatures, exotic plants and unusual specimens. Their technology was advanced but not perfect. The scanner examining Tommy was old, badly maintained, and completely wrong in its assessment. It registered the crying child as abandoned wildlife, an animal without intelligence or family. Just another product to sell at the fringe markets where rich aliens bought strange pets and conversation pieces. Tommy cried for his parents. He cried until his throat was raw and his voice was just a hoarse whisper. The gray creatures ignored him completely. They moved around the ship doing their work, occasionally glancing at him the way someone might glance at a fish in a tank. He was merchandise now. Nothing more. Hours passed or maybe days. Tommy couldn't tell in the artificial light of the ship. He was given food that tasted like wet cardboard mixed with plastic. Water came from a tube in the wall that made strange gurgling sounds. He missed his mom's cooking. He missed his dad's terrible jokes. He missed his bed and his stuffed dog and even his homework. He would have given anything to be back in that forest, roasting marshmallows badly and listening to his parents laugh. Then everything exploded into chaos. The ship lurched violently to one side, throwing Tommy against the wall of his cage. Alarms began shrieking, loud and urgent and terrifying. The collectors scattered in panic, their calm efficiency replaced by frantic movement. Red lights flashed throughout the ship. Through the transparent walls of his prison, Tommy saw something that made his heart stop. The hull was being torn apart. Not by weapons or explosions but by claws. Massive, curved claws that ripped through metal like it was paper. And attached to those claws were creatures that looked like nightmares come to life. They were huge, easily the size of the grizzly bears Tommy had seen in nature documentaries, but they moved with the fluid grace of house cats. Their bodies were covered in fur that seemed to shift colors in the flashing alarm lights, rippling over muscles that looked powerful enough to break stone. Their faces were feline but wrong, with too many teeth and eyes that glowed like hot coals. When they opened their mouths to roar, the sound shook Tommy's bones. These were the Rakashi, though Tommy wouldn't learn their name until later. They were warriors, hunters, predators at the top of the galactic food chain. Other species feared them. Pirates avoided their territory. Even the powerful governments of the Galactic Council treated them with careful respect. And right now they were attacking the collector ship with devastating efficiency. The gray creatures died quickly. They weren't fighters. They were merchants and scavengers, and they had no defense against the fury of Rakashi warriors. Tommy watched in horrified fascination as the feline aliens moved through the ship like violent shadows. Their claws cut through armor and flesh with equal ease. Their teeth found throats. Within minutes, the collectors were gone. The ship shuddered again, harder this time. Something critical must have been damaged because sections of the hull began to break apart. Tommy's cage detached from its moorings and started floating. The artificial gravity was failing. He tumbled inside his crystal prison as it drifted through the dying ship, bouncing off walls and equipment, spinning through the vacuum-touched corridors where bodies and debris floated in the darkness. He must have blacked out because the next thing Tommy remembered was a face. Not a human face. A Rakashi face, close to his cage, studying him with glowing amber eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. Commander Kira was old by Rakashi standards, her midnight black fur streaked with gray scars from 100 battles. One of her triangular ears was torn halfway down, a souvenir from a fight she'd barely survived years ago. She'd been searching the debris field for salvage, maybe weapons or valuable technology her clan could use. She expected to find cargo containers or military equipment. Instead she found a child. Kira tilted her head, her predator's eyes examining the small creature in the floating cage. It was tiny and weak-looking, with skin instead of fur, blunt nails instead of claws, and small flat teeth that couldn't tear meat. It looked like prey. But the way it stared back at her, those brown eyes filled with fear but also defiance, something in that gaze made her pause. She growled softly and Tommy whimpered but didn't look away. Interesting, Kira thought. Prey animals looked away from predators. They submitted. This little creature was terrified but refused to show submission. Kira grabbed the cage with one massive paw and pulled it toward her ship. Behind her, she heard the protest in her earpiece. Her second in command, a young warrior named Dax, was arguing that the creature was useless. Probably someone's pet or food animal. They should leave it and continue salvaging. But Kira thought about the law, the ancient code that governed all Rakashi. The law of the Pride stated clearly that all survivors of battle became clan responsibility. All survivors. The law didn't say all Rakashi survivors or all useful survivors. It said all. Period. This weak, strange little creature had survived when stronger beings had died. That meant something. At least, that's what Kira told herself as she brought Tommy's cage aboard her ship and set course for home. Tommy's first morning on the Rakashi homeworld started with pain. He woke to the sound of young Rakashi cubs fighting in the training grounds below his sleeping chamber. Their growls and roars shook the stone walls. When he looked out the window, he saw children no older than himself tearing into practice dummies with claws that could shred metal. His stomach twisted with fear. The clan had given him a new name. They couldn't pronounce Tommy properly, so they called him Little Claw. At first he thought it was meant as respect. Then he realized it was mockery. He had no claws. He had nothing that made him dangerous. To the Rakashi he looked like walking meat. Kira came to collect him that morning, her massive form filling the doorway. She said nothing, just gestured with her head for him to follow. Tommy's legs shook as he walked behind her toward the training grounds. The other cubs stopped their practice to stare at him. Their glowing eyes tracked his movement like cats watching a mouse. One of them, a large cub with rust-colored fur, actually licked his lips. The training master was an old warrior named Forge. He had scars covering half his face and was missing 2 fingers on his left paw. He looked at Tommy the way someone might look at a bug they were deciding whether to step on. Without any explanation or warm-up, Forge threw Tommy into the sparring circle with 5 other cubs. They destroyed him. Tommy didn't stand a chance. The cubs moved faster than his eyes could follow. Their claws opened cuts across his arms and legs before he could even raise his hands to defend himself. A female cub with silver fur swept his legs and slammed him face-first into the dirt. When he tried to get up, a massive paw pressed down on his back, pinning him helplessly to the ground. The cubs laughed, a sound that was somehow worse than their roars. This became Tommy's daily reality. Every morning he was thrown into combat training with cubs who had been born for war. The Rakashi trained their children from the moment they could walk. By age 3 they were learning to hunt. By 5 they were practicing killing techniques. These weren't games or exercises. This was preparation for a life where weakness meant death. Tommy had none of their advantages. His skin tore easily where their fur protected them. His nails were useless where they had claws that could cut through armor. He couldn't see in the dark like they could. His sense of smell was pathetic compared to theirs. When they moved on instinct, flowing from one attack to the next naturally. Tommy had to think about every motion. And thinking was too slow. A cub named Rend made Tommy's life especially miserable. Rend was the largest of the young Rakashi, with dark brown fur and amber eyes that burned with cruelty. He seemed to take personal offense at Tommy's existence. During one sparring session, Rend's claws raked across Tommy's back, leaving 4 deep gashes that bled through his training clothes. Tommy collapsed, crying from the pain. Rend stood over him and growled something in the Rakashi language that made the other cubs laugh. Later Tommy learned what he'd said. Prey shouldn't pretend to be hunters. Tommy spent his nights alone, crying into his sleeping mat, touching the communicator pendant Kira had given him. It couldn't reach Earth. Nothing could reach that far. But sometimes he'd press it and whisper to his parents anyway, telling them he was sorry for getting taken, promising he was trying to be brave even though he was so scared he could barely breathe. But something else was happening too. Something Tommy didn't notice at first. Kira had been watching him carefully. While the other Rakashi saw only his weakness, she saw something different. She noticed how Tommy studied his opponents before fights, trying to predict their movements. She saw him attempting to use the environment, grabbing handfuls of dirt to throw in faces or positioning himself near walls so he couldn't be surrounded. These weren't Rakashi tactics. Rakashi relied on their natural weapons and aggressive instincts. But Tommy was doing something else. He was thinking. One evening, Kira came to his chamber after the other cubs had gone to their clan houses. She carried a bundle under her arm. Tommy tensed, expecting another beating or some new impossible test. Instead, Kira sat down, making herself smaller and less threatening. She unwrapped the bundle and showed him what was inside. A knife. Not a Rakashi weapon made for claws, but something designed for hands like his. Simple, sharp, balanced. Kira began speaking in her rough, accented version of the Galactic common language that Tommy was slowly learning. She told him that he would never be Rakashi. His body wasn't built for it. But that didn't mean he had to be prey. Humans had something Rakashi didn't have. Humans could make tools. They could use weapons. They could turn their environment into an advantage. Rakashi fought with rage and instinct. Humans fought with their minds. The private training began that night. While the other cubs slept, Kira taught Tommy to use the knife. Not just how to stab or slash, but how to grip it properly, how to angle the blade, where to strike on different body types. She showed him pressure points, weak spots in armor, ways to use an opponent's strength against them. She taught him about leverage and momentum, how a small fighter could topple a large one with the right technique. But more importantly, she taught him to think like a hunter instead of prey. Predators, she explained, don't just react. They plan. They set up ambushes. They use terrain. They create advantages before the fight even starts. Tommy's human brain could do all of this better than any Rakashi because he wasn't driven by hunting instincts. He could be cold and calculated in ways that went against Rakashi nature. The training was brutal in different ways than the daytime sessions. Kira pushed him hard, accepting no excuses or complaints. When Tommy's arms shook from exhaustion, she made him continue. When cuts from practice bled, she told him to ignore the pain. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't gentle either. The galaxy wasn't gentle. It would kill him without hesitation if he stayed weak. Months passed. Tommy grew stronger, not in muscle mass but in skill and knowledge. His body was still covered in scars from the daily beatings in the training grounds. Ren still tormented him, and the other cubs still laughed at the weak human trying to be a warrior. But something had changed inside Tommy. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something harder. Anger. Determination. A stubborn refusal to give up no matter how many times they knocked him down. Then came the announcement that made Tommy's blood run cold. The Crystal Canyon trial. Every Rakashi cub had to face it at age 7. 3 days alone in one of the most dangerous wildernesses on the planet. The canyons were filled with predators that hunted adult Rakashi for sport. Massive serpents that could swallow a person whole. Pack hunters with venomous bites. Flying creatures with talons like swords. Most cubs survived by using their natural abilities and clan training. Some didn't survive at all. The other cubs in Tommy's group were excited. This was their chance to prove themselves as warriors. Rend boasted loudly about how many kills he would make. The silver-furred female, whose name was Storm, sharpened her claws with obvious anticipation. Tommy said nothing. He just packed his survival kit with shaking hands, including the knife Kira had given him and every piece of knowledge she'd taught him. On the morning of the trial, transport ships dropped each cub at different locations throughout the Crystal Canyons. Tommy watched his cohort disappear into their assigned zones. Then it was his turn. The ship door opened above a rocky outcrop. The pilot, a scarred warrior missing one eye, looked at Tommy with something like pity. He clearly didn't expect the human cub to survive. Tommy jumped. He hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact like Kira had taught him. The ship disappeared into the sky, leaving him utterly alone. The canyon stretched around him, beautiful and deadly. Crystal formations jutted from the rocks, catching the sunlight and throwing rainbow patterns across the stone. In the distance, Tommy heard a roar that made his bones vibrate. Something big. Something hungry. The first rule Kira had taught him echoed in his mind. Don't panic. Panicking makes you prey. Predators think first, act second. Tommy took a deep breath and started to work. 10 years vanished in what felt like a blink, yet every day had been etched into Tommy's body and mind like carvings in stone. At 17 he stood tall and lean, his frame packed with muscle that moved beneath his skin with controlled power. His face had lost the softness of childhood, replaced by sharp angles and a jaw that could have been cut from granite. But it was his eyes that drew attention. They held something dangerous, something that made even hardened warriors pause before approaching him. His body was a map of survival. Dozens of scars marked his arms, chest, and back. Each one told a story. The 3 parallel lines across his ribs came from his first solo hunt when a canyon predator nearly gutted him. The circular mark on his shoulder was his first honor scar, carved by Kira herself after the Crystal Canyon trial. The jagged line down his forearm came from defending a younger cub against a pack of wild hunters. Rakashi wore their scars with pride, and Tommy had learned to do the same. He moved differently now. Gone was the clumsy human child who stumbled through the training grounds. Tommy flowed through space like water, each step calculated and silent. He could cross a room full of sleeping warriors without disturbing a single breath. When he fought, his movements were efficient and deadly, wasting no energy on flashy displays. The Rakashi had taught him well. He was a predator now, even if he lacked their claws and fangs. But he was still obviously human. His skin remained smooth and unmarked by fur. His teeth were flat and his nails blunt. His eyes didn't glow in the darkness. Whenever the Blood Fang clan traveled to trading stations or border outposts, aliens would stop and stare. Most had never encountered a human before. Some would point and whisper. Others would approach cautiously, asking if he was someone's exotic pet or perhaps an illegal specimen. Tommy had learned to handle these situations with cold precision. The last alien who tried to pat his head like a dog had ended up flat on his back with Tommy's knife pressed against his throat. Word spread quickly after that. The human who traveled with the Blood Fang clan wasn't prey. He was something else entirely. Something dangerous. The clan had accepted him fully by then. Young warriors sought his advice on tactics. Elders nodded with respect when he entered rooms. He'd earned his place through blood and survival, proving himself in 100 small battles and a dozen major ones. He was Rakashi in all but biology. The clan was his family. The warrior's code was his religion. This life among the stars was all he truly remembered. But then Kira began to fade. Age catches everyone eventually, even the greatest warriors. Kira had survived countless battles, earned more honor scars than most Rakashi accumulated in 2 lifetimes. But her body was finally giving up. Old wounds that had never properly healed began to fail. Her movements became slower, her breathing labored. The clan healers did what they could, but everyone knew the truth. Kira was dying. Tommy spent every possible moment at her side. The fierce warrior who had found him as a terrified child, who had trained him when others wanted him dead, who had given him the tools to survive in a galaxy that saw humans as nothing more than curiosities. She had saved his life in every way that mattered. On her final day, Kira's breathing became shallow and wet. Her eyes, once burning with fierce amber fire, had dimmed to a soft glow. Tommy sat beside her sleeping platform, holding her massive paw in his human hands. Her claws, worn down from decades of use, no longer looked threatening. They just looked tired. Kira's eyes focused on him with difficulty. She managed a weak growl that might have been a laugh. With trembling movements, she reached beneath her sleeping furs and pulled out a small data chip. The device looked ancient, scorched on one side and cracked along the edge. Tommy recognized it immediately. It had come from the collector ship all those years ago. The truth, Kira whispered in the galactic common language they'd always used together. Her voice was barely audible. About where you came from. Tommy's hands shook as he took the chip. His throat felt tight. He'd stopped thinking about Earth years ago. It hurt too much. The memories of his parents had faded to blurry images that might have been dreams. He'd convinced himself that this was his life now, that the past didn't matter. I saved this, Kira continued, each word clearly causing her pain. Kept it hidden. Thought maybe someday you'd want to know. Tommy wanted to tell her it didn't matter, that the clan was his family now, that he didn't need to know about a world he could never return to. But he couldn't speak. His voice had abandoned him. Kira's breathing rattled. You have family there. Real family. I stole that from you when I brought you to our world. I told myself it was mercy that I was following clan law. But maybe it was just selfishness. You became like a son to me, Tommy Blake. I didn't want to lose that. Tears ran down Tommy's face. He didn't try to hide them. Rakashi didn't cry, but he was still human enough for that. You are Rakashi in spirit, Kira said, her voice fading. But human in blood. Both are yours to claim. Both are yours to honor. Don't forget where you came from, even if you choose to stay with us. Her breathing stopped sometime during the night. Tommy held her paw until dawn, then prepared her body according to Rakashi tradition. The clan gathered for the funeral rites, and Tommy stood among them, his face marked with ceremonial ash as they burned Kira's body and sang the death songs. She had died with honor. She would be remembered. The next day, Tommy locked himself in his quarters and inserted the data chip into a reader. His hands shook as files began to open on the screen. The first was a news report from Earth, dated nearly 11 years ago. Missing child, Tommy Blake, age 6, disappeared during camping trip in Oregon. Parents Robert and Laura Blake requesting any information. A reward offered. There was a photo. His parents, younger than he remembered, standing beside a poster with his own face on it. His mother's eyes were red from crying. His father looked like he hadn't slept in days. Tommy's chest felt like it was being crushed. More files followed. Updates over the years. His parents aging in the photos, their hope visibly diminishing but never quite dying. They'd never stopped searching. Never stopped believing he might come home. The final file was Earth's location, precise coordinates and hyperspace routes. His homeworld. The planet he'd been stolen from. Tommy closed the files and sat in darkness for a long time. Then he accessed the galactic network, something he rarely did. He began searching for information about Earth, about humans, about his species' place in the greater galaxy. What he found made his blood turn to ice. Earth was classified as a protected developing world. According to galactic law, no contact was permitted for another 200 years. Humanity was supposed to be left alone to develop naturally. But the law had loopholes. Criminal networks exploited them constantly. And as Tommy dug deeper into the dark corners of the galactic net, he found the horrifying truth. Humans were being taken. Not just him. Dozens, maybe hundreds over the past decades. The collectors had been doing it for years before they grabbed Tommy. Other groups had started doing it too. Humans were rare, exotic, valuable. They sold for high prices to wealthy collectors, research labs, private armies looking for expendable soldiers. Tommy found auction listings. Images that made him want to vomit. Children in cages, their eyes hollow and broken. Adults chained and marked with identification numbers. His people. His species. Being bought and sold like animals while Earth remained unaware, while galactic authorities looked the other way because acknowledging the problem meant admitting the protected world law had failed. One image stopped him cold. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, with dark hair and terrified eyes. She looked exactly like Tommy must have looked in that crystal cage so many years ago. The listing described her as docile specimen, suitable for domestication or basic labor. Rage exploded through Tommy's chest, hotter and more violent than anything he'd ever felt. His vision went red. His hands clenched into fists so tight his nails drew blood from his palms. The Rakashi had taught him to channel anger into action, to turn fury into focused violence. That training kicked in now. He thought about Kira's final words. About having 2 families, 2 worlds to honor. He thought about the Rakashi code that had been drilled into him for 10 years. Protect the weak. Destroy those who prey on the helpless. Stand against injustice even when law demands silence. He looked at Kira's honor blade, which now belonged to him. The weapon she'd carried through 100 battles, which she'd used to carve his first honor scar, which represented everything she'd taught him about strength and duty and courage. Kira's voice echoed in his memory, something she'd told him years ago during training. Law without justice is just another word for cowardice. Tommy stood up. His decision was made. The fringe markets hung in space like a massive tumor, a sprawling station cobbled together from hundreds of derelict ships welded into one chaotic structure. It existed in the dead zone where 3 galactic sectors met, a place where no single government had clear authority. That made it perfect for criminals. Here, anything could be bought if you had enough credits. Weapons, drugs, stolen technology, illegal specimens. And humans? Tommy stood at the observation window of a cheap hotel room, staring at the station's twisted architecture. He'd been here for 2 weeks now, playing the role of a freelance mercenary looking for work. It wasn't hard to blend in. The station was crawling with warriors from a dozen species, all selling their services to the highest bidder. A human traveling with Rakashi gear barely raised an eyebrow in a place like this. He'd brought a team with him. 5 Rakashi warriors who owed him blood debts from past battles. They'd followed him without question when he explained the mission, even though it meant breaking galactic law and potentially starting a war. That was the Rakashi way. Honor and loyalty mattered more than laws written by distant politicians. The team had spent these 2 weeks carefully mapping the station, identifying guard patterns, locating security systems, and most importantly, finding where the humans were being kept. It hadn't been easy. The consortium that ran the trafficking operation was careful. They had connections that reached into the Galactic Council itself, bought and paid for officials who made sure investigations went nowhere. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. Tommy had finally gotten the information he needed yesterday. A drunk guard in a station bar, paid off with stolen credits, had revealed the location. Lower level, Section 7, behind a legitimate cargo warehouse. The guard had laughed about it, joking about the merchandise they were moving this week. Tommy had smiled and bought the guard another drink. Then he'd followed him into an alley after closing time and made sure he'd never talk about human cargo again. Now, standing at the window, Tommy felt ice water flowing through his veins. He'd learned to recognize this feeling. It was the calm before violence, the moment when emotion shut down and pure tactical thinking took over. Kira had taught him this. Fear and anger were useful, but they had to be controlled, channeled, turned into weapons rather than weaknesses. His communicator buzzed. A coded message from Thorn, one of his team members. The reconnaissance was complete. They had confirmed numbers, security measures, and guard rotations. More importantly, they'd confirmed what Tommy had feared. 43 humans. Men, women, teenagers, children. All scheduled to be sold within the next 3 days. Tommy closed his eyes and took a slow breath. 43 people. His people. He opened his eyes and began checking his equipment. 2 combat knives, Tanto-style blades that Rakashi metalworkers had forged specifically for his human hands. A compact projectile weapon loaded with armor-piercing rounds. Several grenades, both explosive and smoke. And Kira's honor blade, strapped across his back. He never went into battle without it. The team assembled in Tommy's room an hour before midnight. Thorn was the largest, a massive warrior with gray fur and scars covering half his face. Frost had pure white fur and eyes like chips of blue ice. Nash and River were siblings, both lean and fast with rust-colored coats. And Old Forge, the same warrior who'd been Tommy's brutal training master years ago, now fought beside him as an equal. They didn't need a long briefing. The plan was simple. Overwhelming violence executed with perfect coordination. Get in, free the humans, get out. Anyone who stood in their way died. No mercy for people who caged children. At midnight station time, when the markets were quietest and most guards were either drunk or sleeping, they moved. Thorn and Frost hit the power grid first, their technical skills shutting down entire sections of the station's electrical system. Lights died. Emergency systems kicked in, bathing corridors in dim red backup lighting. Alarms should have sounded immediately, but Nash had already sliced into the security network, feeding it false data that showed everything was fine. Nash and River hit the guard barracks next. They moved like ghosts through the darkened hallways, tossing smoke grenades through doorways and following up with neural disruptors that dropped targets without killing them. The Rakashi could be merciful when it served the mission. Unconscious guards couldn't raise alarms. Forge secured their escape route, positioning himself at a key junction with heavy weapons and enough ammunition to hold off a small army. His job was simple. Nobody gets past him. Nobody stops the team from getting those humans out. Tommy went for the cages alone. He moved through the station's lower levels like a shadow given form. Years of Rakashi training had taught him how to use darkness, how to read his environment through sound and feel rather than sight. His boots made no sound on the metal floors. His breathing was controlled and silent. He was a predator hunting in his natural element. The first guard never saw him coming. Tommy's blade found the gap between helmet and armor, a quick thrust that severed the spinal cord. The guard dropped without a sound. Tommy caught the body and lowered it gently to prevent noise. 2 more guards stood at an intersection ahead, talking in low voices about some sporting event. Tommy pulled a throwing knife from his belt and sent it spinning through the air. It buried itself in one guard's throat. Before the body hit the ground, Tommy was moving. He crossed the distance in 3 silent strides and drove his second blade up under the other guard's jaw. The guard's eyes went wide with shock, then empty. More guards appeared, responding to the power failure. These ones were more alert, weapons drawn. They saw Tommy coming and opened fire. But hitting a moving target in dim red light was harder than they expected, especially when that target moved like Tommy did. He flowed between their shots, using walls and door frames for cover, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The first guard went down with Tommy's blade in his eye socket. The second took a roundhouse kick to the knee that shattered bone, followed by a knife thrust to the heart. The third managed to get his weapon up, but Tommy grabbed it, redirected it, and used the guard's own momentum to slam him face first into a wall hard enough to crack his skull. 4 more guards rushed around the corner. Tommy pulled his projectile weapon and fired in controlled bursts. The armor-piercing rounds punched through their body armor like it was paper. They went down in a tangle of limbs and pooling blood. The corridor was clear. Tommy ran. The holding area was behind a reinforced door with electronic locks. Tommy didn't bother trying to hack it. He planted an explosive charge, stepped back and blew the door off its hinges. The blast echoed through the lower levels like thunder. Alarms finally started wailing. The whole station would know something was happening now. Time was running out. Tommy stepped through the smoke and twisted metal into a large room. And there they were. 43 humans in electrified cages stacked along the walls like shipping containers. The smell hit him first. Unwashed bodies, fierce sweat, human waste. These people had been living in their own filth, treated worse than animals. His eyes scanned the faces. Adults with hollow, broken expressions. Teenagers who'd given up hope. Children who stared at nothing, their minds retreating to places where the horror couldn't reach them. One little girl in particular caught his attention. She couldn't have been older than 8, with tangled dark hair and eyes that looked 1,000 years old. She didn't cry or call out. She just sat in her cage, staring at the walls like she'd forgotten what it meant to be alive. Tommy felt something crack inside his chest. Rage flooded through him, hot and pure and righteous. These were his people. His species. And someone had done this to them. He ran to the main control panel and started working the interface. It was designed for alien hands, but he'd learned dozens of alien technologies over the years. His fingers flew over the controls. The system resisted, demanding authorization codes he didn't have. Tommy snarled and ripped the panel open with his bare hands. Electricity arced and burned his palms, but he didn't care. He tore through wires and circuits until he found the main power line and yanked it free. The cages went dark. Their electrified bars powered down. The locks disengaged with a series of clicks. 43 humans stared at him through the bars. They looked terrified. He couldn't blame them. He probably looked like a nightmare, covered in alien scars, carrying bloody blades, moving like a predator. But he was their nightmare. He was on their side. Tommy walked to the nearest cage and pulled the door open. Inside, a middle-aged woman pressed herself against the back wall, shaking. Tommy held up his hands, showing he meant no harm. Then he spoke in English, a language he hadn't used in over a decade. The words felt strange in his mouth, his accent twisted by years of speaking alien languages. "My name is Tommy Blake," he said, his voice rough but clear. "I was taken from Earth 11 years ago. I know you're scared. I know you don't understand what's happening. But I'm here to take you home. All of you. I promise." The woman stared at him like he might be a hallucination. Then tears started running down her face. "Home?" she whispered. "Really? Really?" Tommy said. He moved to the next cage and threw it open. "But we need to move fast. Can you walk?" Earth's orbital detection grid picked up the transmission purely by accident. A junior technician at a monitoring station in Colorado was tracking what she thought was space debris when her screen suddenly filled with images that didn't make sense. Humans in cages. Alien creatures. A young man fighting with inhuman grace. She stared at her screen for 10 seconds, her coffee cup forgotten in her hand, before she hit the emergency alert button. Within an hour, every intelligence agency on the planet had the footage. Within 2 hours it had leaked to the press. Within 3 hours the entire world was watching. The images were undeniable. Dozens of humans imprisoned in what looked like a science fiction movie set, except this was real. The cages were real. The aliens were real. And the young man who moved through those corridors like a warrior from legend, cutting down guards and freeing captives, he was definitely real. The footage showed him clearly. Human features, but moving in ways humans shouldn't be able to move. Fighting with a combination of alien weapons and human determination that was both beautiful and terrifying. Governments around the world went into crisis mode. The United Nations called emergency sessions that started immediately and ran through the night. Religious leaders struggled to explain how this fit into their understanding of creation. Scientists who'd spent careers saying intelligent alien life probably existed somewhere out there were now faced with proof that it did, and it had been kidnapping humans for years. News networks ran the footage on constant loops. Social media exploded with theories, panic, and 1,000 different reactions. Some people thought it was an elaborate hoax. Others started loading weapons and staring at the sky. Most just felt a cold fear settling into their bones as they realized humanity wasn't alone in the universe, and some of their cosmic neighbors were hostile. Then Tommy's ship appeared on every detection grid, approaching Earth at impossible speeds. 20 hours after the transmission, his vessel entered orbit. It was clearly alien in design, sleek and powerful, but it broadcast human identification codes that made no sense because humans didn't have spacecraft like that. Military forces around the world went to high alert. Fighter jets scrambled. Missile batteries came online. Submarines surfaced. Every weapon humanity had was suddenly pointed at the sky. Tommy's voice cut through every radio frequency, every communication channel, every broadcast system on the planet. Someone with serious technical skill had hijacked global communications. His words reached billions of people simultaneously. My name is Tommy Blake. I was taken from Oregon 15 years ago when I was 6 years old. I'm bringing home 43 people who were stolen from Earth just like me. Some of them have been gone for years. Some of them were taken just weeks ago. All of them deserve to come home. He paused. In living rooms and offices and military command centers around the world, people held their breath. I need you to understand something. We're not alone in the universe. We've never been alone. And we're not safe. There are criminal organizations out there that have been trafficking humans for decades. They take us because we're rare. Because we're valuable. Because Earth is listed as a protected world that nobody's supposed to contact, which means nobody investigates when we disappear. Another pause. Tommy's voice was strange, his accent American but twisted by something foreign, something that made him sound older than his years. I was raised by aliens. Trained by warriors. I learned their languages and their fighting styles. I became something that bridges two worlds. And I'm using everything they taught me to protect my species. To protect all of you. The galaxy needs to know that humans aren't prey anymore. We're not helpless. And we won't tolerate this crime continuing. The transmission ended. But Tommy's ship remained in orbit, clearly visible to tracking systems worldwide. In a modest house in Oregon, an older couple sat on their couch, holding each other and crying. Robert and Laura Blake had gray hair now. Lines creased their faces from years of worry and grief. They'd never stopped searching for their son. Never stopped hoping. And now, after 15 years, his voice had reached them from space. He was alive. He was coming home. Governments debated frantically about what to do. Some military leaders argued Tommy should be arrested immediately for provoking alien attention and potentially starting an interstellar war. Others called him a hero for exposing the trafficking and bringing victims home. Politicians argued about jurisdiction, legality, and diplomatic protocols for a situation nobody had ever prepared for. While Earth argued with itself, new contacts appeared on the orbital sensors. 12 massive warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. They were huge, dwarfing anything humanity had ever built, bristling with weapons that made nuclear missiles look like firecrackers. The ships bore insignia that Earth's computers couldn't identify. They began accelerating toward Earth at frightening speeds. Tommy's voice came through again, urgent this time. This is the consortium. They're the criminal organization that's been trafficking humans. They're here for me and the people I freed. They have connections in the Galactic Council. They think they're above the law. And they're willing to destroy Earth to protect their operation. Global panic hit new heights. This was it. First contact, and it was hostile. Every doomsday scenario humanity had imagined was coming true. The consortium fleet entered Earth orbit and established a blockade. A transmission came through in heavily accented English. They demanded Tommy's immediate surrender. They demanded the return of their property, meaning the 43 freed humans. And they gave Earth 1 hour to comply or they would begin orbital bombardment. The threat was clear. Cooperate or die. Earth's military forces were hopelessly outmatched. Everyone knew it. Human spacecraft were primitive, barely capable of reaching the moon, while these alien warships crossed light years. Human weapons were designed to fight other humans, not ships with energy shields and armor that could probably shrug off nuclear strikes. But surrender wasn't in human nature. If they were going down, they'd go down fighting. Fighter jets launched worldwide. Experimental orbital platforms that were supposed to be years from completion were rushed into operation. Submarines fired missiles at impossible targets. It was desperate and probably futile, but it was something. Then space tore open again. 7 more warships materialized between Earth and the Consortium fleet. These ships were different, sleeker, and somehow more threatening. They bore markings that Tommy recognized immediately. The Blood Fawn clan. His people. His family. A voice boomed across every communication channel. It was deep and inhuman, translated through computers into English. I am Elder Council Member Beth of the Blood Fawn clan. Tommy Blake is pride sworn. He is clan. He is family. Any attack on him is an attack on every Rakashi warrior in existence. The Consortium fleet will withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The Consortium commander responded with threats and legal justifications and claims that Rakashi had no authority here. Beth's reply was simple. We are Rakashi. We are authority. Choose. What followed was the most important 4 hours in human history. The Consortium fleet opened fire first, targeting the Rakashi ships with weapons that lit up space like artificial suns. But the Rakashi were ready. Their ships moved with impossible grace, dodging attacks that should have been undodgeable. When they returned fire, it was devastating. One Consortium warship simply ceased to exist, vaporized by weapons that turned matter into energy. Earth's military forces threw everything they had into the fight. Fighter jets that were hopelessly outclassed but refused to give up. Missiles that mostly missed but occasionally found targets. Experimental rail guns firing projectiles at relativistic speeds. It was chaos. It was beautiful. It was humanity saying we refuse to die quietly. Tommy was in the middle of it, flying a modified shuttle and coordinating attacks. Heat patched into both Earth's military networks and the Rakashi battle systems, creating a hybrid command structure that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. He could see patterns that pure human commanders missed. He could anticipate moves that pure Rakashi warriors wouldn't consider. He was the bridge between two species, using tactics neither would have developed alone. Earth fighters swarm formation around the damaged Consortium cruiser. Overwhelmed their targeting systems. Rakashi heavy units focus fire on their command ship. Human orbital platforms fire everything at my mark. His commands were clear and confident. People obeyed without questioning. In the chaos of battle, competence was all that mattered. The Consortium fleet was being torn apart. They'd expected an easy victory. Instead, they faced Rakashi warriors who were among the galaxy's most feared predators, backed by humans who fought with desperate courage and unpredictable tactics. It was a combination the Consortium couldn't handle. The Consortium flagship tried to retreat, its commander realizing the battle was lost. But Tommy wasn't letting them escape. Thorn Frost were boarding that ship. I want their leadership alive. His team moved with practiced precision. Their boarding craft latched onto the fleeing flagship's hull. Cutting torches opened holes in the armor. Then they were inside, moving through corridors filled with panicking crew members. Most surrendered immediately when they saw Rakashi warriors coming. Those who fought died quickly. Tommy reached the command center first, kicking the door open and entering with weapons raised. Inside, he found the Consortium's leadership huddled around emergency protocols. And in the center stood someone Tommy hadn't expected. A human. Middle-aged, well-dressed, clearly in charge. The man looked up at Tommy with cold calculation rather than fear. Tommy Blake, the man said with a slight smile. The lost boy who became a legend. I'm Chairman Hayes. I run this operation. Tommy's hands tightened on his weapons. You're human. I am. You've been selling your own species. Tommy's voice was flat, emotionless, which made it somehow more terrifying. They shrugged. I've been surviving. The galaxy is bigger than Earth. Bigger than your small-minded patriotism. I saw an opportunity and took it. These people would have been discovered eventually anyway. I just accelerated the timeline and made myself wealthy in the process. Tommy stared at this man who wore a human face but had abandoned everything that made someone human. He thought about little Amy with her hollow eyes. About 43 people in cages. About 15 years stolen from his own life. You survived, Tommy said quietly. They didn't get that choice. He lowered his weapon slightly. Earth authorities are going to want you. You're going back to stand trial. Hayes laughed. Earth has no jurisdiction over. Tommy moved faster than Hayes could track. One moment he was standing still. The next, his fist connected with Hayes's jaw, dropping the chairman to the floor. Earth has jurisdiction over humans who commit crimes against humans. That's how it works now.